Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go! I'm 32 years old and most of my adult life has been spent working alongside my dad in the business he started when I was just a kid. My parents worked hard to build what we have: a nice house in a quiet neighborhood, a couple of rental properties, and the business that keeps us all employed. My brother and I both knew we were lucky, but we also knew none of it came easy. My brother is 3 years older than me. Growing up, we were close. He went to college, worked in the city for a while, then came back home about 5 years ago to help run the operations side of the business while I handled sales and client relations. We made a good team. Dad was talking about retiring in a few years, and honestly, it felt like everything was falling into place. Then he met her at some networking event about a year and a half ago. At first, she seemed nice enough, polite, chatty, always dressed well. Mom liked her because she brought wine to dinner and complimented the house. I didn't think much of it either way. My brother seemed happy, so I was happy for him. They got engaged last November. That's when things started to change. The first comment came during Thanksgiving dinner. We were all sitting around the table, and Dad was talking about maybe renovating the back deck. Out of nowhere, she said that the timing would be perfect because once they got married, they'd probably just move into the house anyway, since it was too big for just my parents. She said it like it was obvious, like the decision had already been made. Everyone went quiet for a second. Mom looked at Dad, I looked at my brother. He just laughed it off and said they hadn't really talked about that yet. She pressed on though, asking why they would pay rent somewhere else when there was all this space available. I didn't say anything, but it felt weird. My parents still lived there. They weren't going anywhere. A few weeks later, she started asking questions about the business. We were at a family barbecue, and she cornered Dad by the grill. She asked him how the business worked legally, whether it was a partnership between him and us boys, or if he still owned everything. Dad told her he still owned it, but that we ran most of it now. Then he asked why she wanted to know. She said she was just curious because when they took over, she wanted to understand how everything was structured. Dad gave her this look, like he wasn't sure he heard her right. He asked her what she meant by taking over, and she said that eventually they would, right? She said it like it was the obvious plan. Dad told her he hadn't made any plans like that yet. She laughed like he was joking, but Dad didn't laugh back. I saw the way his jaw tightened. That's when I knew he wasn't thrilled about it either. After that, it was like she couldn't help herself. Every family gathering, every dinner, she had something to say. She asked my mom about the rental properties and how much income they brought in. She mentioned how she'd always wanted to live in a house with a big backyard while looking pointedly at my parents' place. She even started talking about redecorating before she'd even moved in anywhere. The worst part was my brother didn't see it, or he didn't want to. I pulled him aside one night after dinner. I asked if we could talk for a second, and he said sure. I brought up his fiancée and asked if he thought she'd been a little too forward about the family stuff. He asked what I meant. I told him I was talking about the house, the business, the properties. I said she kept talking like she already owned it all. He said she was just trying to be involved and that she was going to be part of the family. I told him that being part of the family and acting entitled to everything we had were two different things. He said I was being judgmental and that I didn't even know her that well. I said I knew what I'd been hearing and that Dad had noticed it too. He said Dad hadn't mentioned anything to him. I told him that was because Dad was trying to be polite, but that she'd asked him about taking over the business like it was already decided. He insisted she was just making conversation. I told him no, she wasn't, and that he knew it. He didn't want to hear it. He got defensive, said I was being unfair, and walked away. I felt like I was going crazy. How could he not see it? Things came to a head about 2 months ago. We had a family meeting at the house to discuss some updates to the business. Dad wanted to talk about expansion, new contracts, that sort of thing. She showed up with my brother, which was already odd since it was supposed to be immediate family only. She sat down at the table like she belonged there. She announced that she'd been thinking and that once the wedding happened and they were officially family, she'd love to get more involved in the business side of things. She said she had a background in marketing and thought she could really help grow the brand. Dad told her we weren't really looking to hire anyone right now. She clarified that she didn't mean hired, but as a partner. She said that since they'd be running things eventually, it made sense. I asked who said she'd be running anything. She said that she and my brother would be married, so it was just logical. I told her that marriage didn't mean she automatically inherited a business she didn't build. She said she was just trying to plan for the future. I told her the future wasn't hers to plan, not yet and maybe not ever. My brother told me that was enough, but I said no, it wasn't. I told him she'd been acting like she owned everything since the day he put a ring on her finger. The house, the properties, the business. I said none of it was hers. She said she was being attacked and that she was going to be part of the family. I told her that being part of the family meant respecting what was already here, not treating it like her personal jackpot. Dad finally spoke up, and his voice was calm but firm. He said he thought we needed to be clear about something. He said the business was his, the house was his and Mom's, and that nothing got decided about any of it without their say. Not now, not after any wedding. He asked if that was understood. She went pale. My brother looked like he wanted to disappear. She said she didn't mean to overstep, but Dad told her that she had, and repeatedly. She got up and left. My brother followed her out and I didn't see him for a week. When he finally called me, he sounded tired. He said we needed to talk, and I agreed. We met at a coffee shop near his apartment. He told me that his fiancée had been upset all week and that she felt attacked. I told him I wasn't trying to attack her, but that someone needed to say something. He admitted that he'd started noticing things too. He said that after the meeting she'd made a comment about how unfair it was that Dad wouldn't consider her part of the business. He said he'd asked her why she thought she should be, and she'd said that marrying him meant marrying into everything he had. He said that's when it hit him. She wasn't in love with him. She was in love with what came with him. I asked what he was going to do. He said he didn't know yet, but that he needed time to think. I told him I'd support him no matter what he decided, but that he deserved someone who loved him for him, not for what our last name could give her. 2 weeks later, he called off the engagement. She didn't take it well. She called him ungrateful and said he was throwing away their future over nothing. She even tried to call my parents and plead her case, saying I'd poisoned my brother against her. Mom told her politely that the decision was my brother's to make and that she needed to respect it. After that, she finally left him alone. My brother was hurt for a while, but he seemed relieved too. He said he felt like he could breathe again. Dad didn't say much about it, but one night he pulled me aside and thanked me for speaking up. He said he'd been worried but didn't know how to bring it up without causing problems. Things are calmer now. My brother's doing better, focusing on work and himself. We're back to being the team we used to be, and the business is still ours. All of ours. Just the way it should be. I've been with my boyfriend for about 2 years now. I'm 26 and he's 40, which, honestly, hasn't been much of an issue until recently. We met through mutual friends at a barbecue, and things moved pretty quickly. Within 6 months, I was spending most nights at his place. He owns this nice house in the suburbs with a big backyard for his 2 dogs, and I was still renting a tiny apartment across town, so it just made sense. Everything was great at first. We'd cook dinner together, watch our favorite shows, laugh at stupid comedies. It felt comfortable and easy. But somewhere around the 3-month mark of me living there, this weird pattern started. Every single night we'd settle on the couch to watch TV. Without fail, both of us would doze off at some point. I'd wake up around midnight or 1 in the morning, groggy and disoriented, wanting nothing more than to crawl into an actual bed. And every night, there he'd be, passed out next to me. The first time it happened, I gently shook his shoulder and told him I was heading upstairs and asked if he was coming. He'd grunt, open one eye barely halfway, and mumble something incoherent before his head would loll back against the couch. I figured he just needed a minute to wake up properly, so I'd go upstairs to brush my teeth and wash my face. When I'd come back down 10 minutes later, he'd still be out cold. I'd shake him again and tell him we should go to bed. He'd say, yeah, in a minute, but that minute never came. I go back upstairs, get under the covers, wait 15 minutes, then drag myself back down to try again. This would happen 3, sometimes 4 times a night. I was exhausted, walking up and down those stairs like some kind of sleep-deprived zombie, just trying to get my boyfriend to come to bed. After a few weeks of this torture, I decided to try a different approach. One night, when he didn't respond to my second attempt at waking him, I just stayed in bed. I was tired. My body hurt. I needed sleep. Surely, he was a grown man who could figure out how to walk himself upstairs when he woke up, right? Nope. About 30 minutes later, he stormed into the bedroom and flicked on the light. He asked me what the hell I was thinking, leaving him down there alone in the dark. I squinted against the sudden brightness, completely confused. I told him I tried to wake him up twice, and he wouldn't get up. He said I should have kept trying because I knew he didn't like waking up alone on that couch. I asked him why I had to keep going downstairs over and over just to wake him up when he was in his own house and wasn't lost or anything. He said that wasn't the point, and that the point was I'd left him there. He was genuinely angry at me for not physically dragging him to bed like a child. I tried to explain how frustrating it was from my perspective, how exhausting it was to interrupt my own sleep repeatedly just because he was too cranky to wake up properly. He wasn't hearing it. I suggested we just watch TV in the bedroom so this wouldn't even be an issue. He said he didn't like doing that because he needed to smoke and let the dogs out before bed, so he ended up on the couch anyway. So his nighttime routine meant he'd always be on that couch, and somehow that made it my responsibility to ensure he didn't stay there all night. It made zero sense, but every time I brought it up, he'd act like I was being unreasonable. This went on for months. Some nights I'd have the energy to do the whole up and down routine. Other nights I'd try and inevitably face his anger when he woke up alone. I started dreading our nightly TV time, which was supposed to be our bonding moment. Instead, it became this source of constant tension. Last night was the breaking point. I woke up around 1 in the morning, neck stiff from the awkward couch angle. I shook his arm and told him I was going to bed. He opened his eyes for half a second and closed them again. I shook him once more and asked if he heard me, repeating that I was going upstairs. He mumbled something that sounded like agreement. I was too tired to care anymore. I went upstairs, brushed my teeth, got into bed, and closed my eyes. For about 10 minutes, I had peace. Then I heard his heavy footsteps on the stairs, and my stomach dropped. He appeared in the doorway, and I could see the anger on his face even in the dark. He asked me if I remembered when he told me he didn't like being left on the couch and wanted to know what the hell was wrong with me. I told him I'd said I was going to bed, twice actually. He said I should have made sure he was actually up. I said I wasn't his mother and that I'd tried to wake him and told him where I was going and reminded him he was 40 years old. He told me not to give him that age crap and said this was about respect. I asked him what about respecting that I was exhausted and shouldn't have to walk up and down the stairs 5 times a night because he couldn't wake up. He said if I cared about him, I'd make sure he didn't wake up alone and disoriented. Something in me just snapped. The tears came before I could stop them. I told him I hated him, hated this whole situation, and hated that he made me feel crazy for wanting to just go to sleep. I grabbed my pillow and went back downstairs to the stupid couch that had caused all of this. I cried myself to sleep, feeling completely hopeless. This morning I found a discussion thread online about someone dealing with the exact same situation. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive of the person trying to go to bed, calling the other partner manipulative and unreasonable. I sent him the link, hoping maybe seeing other people's perspectives would help him understand. He woke me up at 7 in the morning and told me to get my stuff because he was taking me home. The car ride was silent. When he pulled up to my apartment, he finally spoke. He said he expected an apology from me and would be waiting to hear it. I apologized for saying I hated him and told him I didn't actually hate him. Then I asked if he'd read the thread I sent. He said no, he didn't give a damn what some strangers on the internet thought. I said maybe it would help him see why this was so frustrating for me. He said he didn't need to see anything and that I owed him an apology for leaving him on that couch and for what I said. He told me that until he got it, we were done talking. I got out of the car and watched him drive away. Now I'm sitting here in my apartment, wondering how something so stupid became such a huge problem. Part of me wants to call him and apologize just to make things normal again. but a bigger part of me is asking why I should apologize for needing sleep, for not being able to physically force a grown man to come to bed with me. My phone has been silent all day. I keep picking it up, putting it down, picking it up again. I don't know what happens next, but I do know one thing. I'm never waking him up from that couch again. My wife was pregnant with our first kid, and we had bills piling up. A buddy of mine worked at the airport and told me they were hiring. The pay was decent, the hours were long but predictable, and honestly, most days were pretty boring. Just checking badges, monitoring cameras, and dealing with the occasional lost tourist. I thought I'd seen everything until that Tuesday afternoon. It started like any other shift. I was stationed near Gate 47, keeping an eye on the flow of passengers. The afternoon rush was dying down and I was looking forward to my break when I heard shouting coming from the ticket counter about 50 feet away. A woman was standing there, and even from a distance, I could tell she was furious. She was waving her phone in the air, and the poor ticket agent looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. I moved closer just in case things got worse. My supervisor always told us to position ourselves near potential problems before they became actual problems. The woman was yelling that the situation was absolutely unacceptable and that she had paid good money for her ticket. The ticket agent tried to explain that the flight had left an hour ago and that the woman hadn't been at the gate for boarding. The woman shot back that she had been in the lounge, the expensive, overpriced lounge that she had paid extra for, and that nobody had told her the flight was leaving. I could see other passengers starting to stare. Some were filming on their phones. The ticket agent, who couldn't have been older than 25, was maintaining her composure remarkably well. I'd seen grown men crumble under less hostility. The ticket agent explained that the boarding time had been clearly printed on the ticket and that several announcements had been made. She apologized but said that once the plane had left, there was nothing anyone could do. The woman interrupted and said she didn't care about excuses. She complained about having an important meeting tomorrow morning and asked if the agent knew who she was. The agent offered to help book another flight. She mentioned there was one leaving tomorrow morning at 6 that would get the woman there by 9. The woman exploded at this suggestion. She screamed about needing to be there tonight, not tomorrow. She demanded that the agent call the plane back right now. The agent apologized again and explained that calling the plane back was impossible because the aircraft was already halfway to its destination. I moved a bit closer. My hand instinctively went to my radio. Something about this woman's energy was setting off alarm bells in my head. I'd learned to trust that instinct. The woman then demanded to be put on another plane immediately. The agent tried to explain that all flights to that destination had already left for the day and that the next available flight was tomorrow morning. She offered to book the woman on that flight at no additional charge. The woman lost it. She screamed about how the airline staff had made her miss her flight and asked how rebooking her could possibly be considered doing her a favor. Other ticket agents were starting to notice the commotion. A supervisor began making her way over. I caught her eye and gave her a subtle nod. She understood. I was ready if needed. The supervisor introduced herself and said she understood there had been an issue with the flight. The woman immediately accused the incompetent staff of making her miss her flight. She repeated her complaint about being in the lounge and nobody coming to tell her about boarding. The supervisor apologized for the inconvenience but explained that passengers were responsible for tracking their own boarding times. She offered to rebook the woman on tomorrow's flight free of charge and provide a meal voucher for the inconvenience. The woman shouted that she didn't want a meal voucher and that she wanted to be on a plane right then and there. The supervisor tried to make her understand that it simply wasn't possible because all flights to her destination had left for the day. That's when things took a turn. Karen's face turned red and she slammed her hand on the counter. She screamed that they needed to fix this immediately, or she swore she would blow up the entire place. The words hung in the air for a split second. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. The supervisor's face went pale. Other passengers gasped and started backing away. My training kicked in immediately. I grabbed my radio and called for immediate backup at Gate 47, reporting a possible threat. Within seconds, 4 other security officers showed up at the ticket counter. I approached Karen with my hands visible. keeping my voice calm but direct. I told her to stay exactly where she was and put her hands where I could see them. Her eyes widened when she suddenly realized what she'd said. Her expression changed from anger to panic. She started backtracking immediately, saying she didn't mean it like that and that she was just upset. She insisted it was just a figure of speech. I told her that threatening to blow up an airport was a federal offense and ordered her to put her hands behind her back. She protested that we were being ridiculous and that she obviously didn't mean it literally. She argued that we couldn't arrest her for being upset, but we could, and we did. Two officers grabbed her arms while I cuffed her. She tried to resist twisting and pulling, but it was over in seconds. She was still protesting when we escorted her toward the security office. She kept shouting that the situation was insane and demanding to speak to our manager. She threatened to sue all of us and said we were all going to lose our jobs. Within minutes, federal agents and airport police had arrived. They took over, and Karen was removed from the terminal entirely. I later heard she was charged with making terroristic threats, which carries serious federal penalties. She'd be dealing with much more than a missed flight. The ticket agent was shaken but okay. Her supervisor gave her the rest of the day off. I spent the next 2 hours filling out reports and giving statements. My supervisor clapped me on the shoulder and told me I'd handled it perfectly. I went home that night and hugged my wife extra tight. I work in film production and have been doing it for some years now. Most people think it's all red carpets and celebrities, but really, it's a lot of standing around in parking lots at 5 a.m. holding equipment and trying not to trip over cables. I started as a production assistant right out of college, mostly because I had a film degree and no idea what else to do with it. Now I'm a coordinator, which sounds fancier than it is. I organize shoots, get permits, make sure nobody wanders into frame, and wear a lot of neon vests. This day we were shooting B-roll footage at the local airport. B-roll is just background shots like planes taking off and people walking through terminals. We use it to fill gaps in documentaries or commercials. Our producer had gotten full permission from the airport's public relations department weeks in advance. We had badges, permits, the whole deal. They even assigned us a liaison who showed us where we could and couldn't set up. We'd been there since 6 in the morning. I was wearing my usual setup with a neon yellow vest, headset looped around my neck, clipboard with call sheets and gate maps, and a walkie-talkie clipped to my belt. I looked official, I'll admit. But that was kind of the point because airport security needs to know at a glance that you're supposed to be there. Around noon we were setting up near one of the main concourses just outside the secure area. My job at that moment was to make sure nobody walked into the shot, while our cinematographer was getting some wide angles of the departures board. Pretty straightforward. That's when she appeared. This woman came storming over, dragging one of those oversized hard-shell suitcases behind her. She was already red in the face, and I could tell from 50 feet away that she was on a mission. I tried to look busy with my clipboard, hoping she'd pick someone else to yell at. No such luck. She started yelling at me before she even reached me, demanding to know why I was just standing around when passengers needed help. She said her flight got delayed and she wanted to speak to someone in charge immediately. I looked up and tried to explain that I wasn't airport staff, just part of a film crew shooting footage for the day. She looked me up and down like I'd just insulted her entire family. She told me to stop pretending to be airport staff if I wasn't going to help people. Then she shoved her boarding pass against my chest and I caught it. She pointed at the pass and said it showed gate 17. She explained that her flight was supposed to leave 40 minutes ago and nobody was giving her any information. She added that she had a connecting flight in Denver, and if she missed it, she was going to sue somebody. I tried again, telling her I really couldn't help with flight issues because I didn't work for the airline or the airport. I pointed toward the ticket counter about 30 feet away, where two employees in actual uniforms were standing. I suggested she talk to them instead. They were both watching this whole thing unfold with the kind of exhausted expression that told me they'd already dealt with her earlier. She snapped back that she'd already talked to them and they were useless. She said I was wearing a vest and had a headset, so I clearly worked there and needed to help her. I started to explain that the vest was just for safety around the runway because we were filming, but she cut me off. She said she didn't care what I was filming and demanded that I fix her flight. Then she pulled out her phone and started recording me. She announced loudly that she was documenting everything because I was refusing to help a paying customer. She said she was going to post a video everywhere. At this point, my cinematographer had stopped working and was just watching the scene. My producer was a few gates down, coordinating with our liaison, so I was stuck dealing with this alone. The airline employees behind the counter were now actively avoiding eye contact. They'd clearly washed their hands of the situation. I made one more attempt to reason with her. I explained that I genuinely had no way to help her. I told her I had no access to flight information, no connection to the airline, and no authority at the airport. I was just holding a clipboard. She asked why I was dressed like airport staff if I didn't work there. I explained again that it was a safety requirement for filming near the runway. She wasn't listening anymore. She just kept recording and ranting about terrible customer service and incompetence. She said she was going to get me fired. The irony was that I didn't even work for anyone she could complain to, but logic had clearly left the conversation. After about 5 minutes of this nonsense, I was completely done. I looked down at her boarding pass still crumpled in my hand. I told her fine, I'd help her. I asked what gate she said it was. She stopped mid-rant, suddenly looking smug and victorious. She repeated that it was gate 17. I told her to follow me. I walked toward the departures board with her trailing behind, dragging her massive suitcase and radiating satisfaction. I stopped right in front of the screen and scanned the list until I found gate 17. Then I pointed at it. I told her there it was, gate 17. Fixed. She looked up at the screen. It clearly displayed that flight 2847 to Denver was cancelled. She just stood there staring. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, but no sound came out. She looked at me, then back at the screen, then at me again. I could see her brain short-circuiting, trying to process what had just happened. I didn't stick around to watch the meltdown. I turned and walked back toward our equipment, raising my walkie-talkie. I radioed my producer and told her we might have some interesting background talent now. I described the woman in the blue jacket standing near the departures board and mentioned she was animated. I suggested it might actually add some realism to our shot if she stayed there. My producer's voice came through the radio telling me to keep the woman in frame if she didn't move. I went back one more time. Karen was still standing in the exact same spot, staring at the screen like it had personally betrayed her. The airline employees at the counter weren't even trying to hide their smiles anymore. One of them gave me a subtle thumbs up when he thought nobody else was looking. I went back to work, checking my clipboard and making sure our next setup was ready. Behind me, I could hear her starting to argue with someone else, probably demanding to speak to a manager about the cancellation. That wasn't my problem anymore. My cinematographer came over and asked if we got that on camera. I told him we didn't, but that it would have been gold. He laughed and said we should have been rolling. The rest of the shoot went smoothly. We got all our B-roll, packed up our equipment, and were out of there by 3. When we were loading the van, I saw Karen still near the ticket counter, now yelling at what looked like a supervisor. She'd probably be there for hours. I climbed into the van, took off my vest, and tossed my clipboard onto the seat. My producer asked if I was okay after all that. I told her I was fine, just another day in production. She laughed and said at least it made the day more interesting. I moved back to the East Coast after things didn't work out for me out west. I had been living in California for a few years, trying to make it work, but eventually I had to admit defeat. My savings were gone, my relationship had ended badly, and I needed to regroup. So I packed up my car and drove across the country back to my childhood home. My parents didn't ask questions when I showed up with everything I owned crammed into my Honda. They just helped me unload and set up my old bedroom like I'd never left. I was 26 years old back in my teenage bedroom, trying to finish my degree at a local college after dropping out the first time around. It wasn't exactly where I thought I'd be at this point in my life, but my parents made it bearable. The thing about my parents is that they're absolutely ridiculous together. They have been married since 1968. That's over 50 years of marriage. and somehow they still act like teenagers around each other, but not in a gross lovey-dovey way. They play pranks on each other constantly, little petty things that would probably annoy most people, but they seem to find it hilarious. I was about 3 months into living back home when I really started to understand their dynamic. I had finished my classes for the day and came home to find the house quiet. My mom was downstairs doing something in the kitchen, and I decided to go watch TV in my parents' room because they had the good cable package and a bigger screen. I was sprawled across their bed watching some show when my dad came in carrying a huge armload of laundry. Clean clothes, fresh from the dryer, all folded neatly. Before he even made it fully through the doorway, I heard my mom's voice echo up the stairs from the kitchen. She yelled at him to put the clothes away properly and not dump them all over her exercise bike. I looked over at the exercise bike parked at the end of their bed. It was one of those stationary bikes that my mom had bought with grand plans to use it every morning. From what I could tell, it mostly just collected dust and served as a very expensive coat rack. My dad didn't say anything back. He just walked past me toward their walk-in closet. I watched as he disappeared inside, and I could hear hangers scraping against the rod when he put his clothes away properly. The whole process took maybe 2 minutes. Then he walked back out of the closet and I noticed he was carrying another armload of clothes. Different clothes. These ones looked like they'd been sitting in the closet for a while. Probably stuff my mom had left on a chair or something that he'd hung up at some point. Without saying a word, my dad walked over to the exercise bike. He carefully draped the clothes all over it. A sweater over the handlebars, a pair of pants across the seat, a few shirts hanging off the back. He arranged them almost artistically, making sure they were distributed evenly across the entire bike. Then he just walked out of the room like nothing had happened. I sat there trying not to laugh. The whole thing had been so deliberate, so perfectly petty. He knew exactly what he was doing. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. My mom walked into the bedroom, probably coming to grab something. She stopped dead when she saw the exercise bike absolutely covered in clothes. She just stood there for a moment, staring at it, then let out the longest, most dramatic sigh I'd ever heard. I told her that she must know he only does that kind of thing to get under her skin and rile her up on purpose. My mom turned to look at me with this little smile on her face. She said she knew that perfectly well. Then she explained that was exactly why she always left all her clothes draped over the edge of the bathtub, so my dad would trip over them whenever he came and went from there. She told me it was just a game they played with each other. I laughed. These two had been married for over 50 years, and they spent their time playing elaborate pranks on each other like they were still in their 20s. My mom went on to say that they had been doing this kind of thing forever and that it kept things interesting between them. I told her that it seemed kind of twisted when I really thought about it. She shrugged and said maybe it was, but it worked for them. She added that they giggled about their pranks constantly. She walked over and started removing the clothes from the bike, folding them properly this time. But I noticed she left one shirt draped over the handlebars, just barely hanging there. Her own little addition to the game. Over the next few months living there, I witnessed countless examples of their petty warfare. My dad would reorganize the kitchen cabinets so my mom couldn't find anything. My mom would reset all his phone settings. He'd hide the TV remote in increasingly ridiculous places. She'd switch his coffee to decaf without telling him. But I also learned something important. My mom pulled me aside one day with this serious look on her face. She told me that my father and her kept their skills honed on each other for a very specific reason. They practiced on each other so they were always ready when they needed to be. I asked her what she meant by being ready. She explained that they needed to be prepared for whenever someone got on their bad side. She said you don't stay married this long without learning how to work as a team. And she warned me that you definitely don't want to mess with people who have been perfecting petty revenge for 5 decades straight. I thought about that conversation a few weeks later when some entitled woman at my mom's book club tried to take credit for my mom's recipes at a charity bake sale. The woman said she'd made these elaborate cookies that my mom had actually spent 2 days preparing. My parents went into action like a well-oiled machine. My dad accidentally on purpose spilled punch on the woman's white designer purse. My mom made sure everyone at the event knew exactly who had really made those cookies, casually mentioning it in every conversation. By the end of the night, the woman had left early in embarrassment, and my parents were giggling together in the corner like they'd just pulled off the heist of the century. I moved into my own place about 6 months after that. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.